Only 18% of California households can afford the median priced home right now in California. That's not a headline. That's the buyer sitting across from you at an open house, pre-approved, stretched thin, doing the math in their head before they even reach the kitchen. And here's what that means for you if you're selling. If you take their polite feedback at face value, you're going to leave money on the table, or worse, sit on the market while your price does the talking nobody wants to hear. Because here's the gap. To your face, it's a cozy backyard, or the layout is interesting, or they need to talk about it. And we know how that turns out, because in the car, it's a completely different conversation. And that gap between what they say and what they mean is exactly where deals get lost. Today, I'm closing that gap. 10 offer killers buyers won't tell you to their face, but I will. And number 5 is the one that costs sellers the most money on this market. So let's get into it. And number 1 on my list is the backyard size and privacy and usability of that same backyard. In Southern California, people use the entire property for entertainment and family use. And if they are given a description for the property that drags them out to that property, and all of a sudden they find out that that backyard is nothing like the descriptions that they have actually seen online, they are going to walk away super fast. So what does that look like? Well, you want to make sure that your backyard is usable by the dog, the kids, and it doesn't have to be big square footage, but the square footage has to be usable. And it really needs to be as private as possible. Now, I'm talking about things that aren't really that easily fixable. So when we are pricing the property, we want to make sure that we price around these things and do the little things to help it get better by, adding trees for a little bit of extra privacy, or clearing away trees or bushes and whatnot that don't fit or make it harder to use the backyard. Not every house has to have a backyard. We just need to keep that in mind when we're listing the property at a specific price. All right, number 2 is another one of those things that, we really can't do a lot about, but it is something that we try to mitigate as much as possible and keep in mind, and that is location and neighborhood fit. So sometimes when they're talking to our files, it is not quite the right feel, or weighing other areas, and they just know in their head that maybe it's the wrong school district, or it's too close to a freeway, or there's air traffic that comes across all the time. These things are things that get affected the value of your property, but don't necessarily get talked about because people don't want to be impolite when they're standing in front of you, especially even just the realtor, because they just don't want to be rude. But my phrase is, the rudest thing they can do is not make an offer. Now, they're not trying to be rude when they don't make an offer. I want people to buy the houses that they want. But what we want to do is understand, how they feel the value is, so we can translate that into the next person really wanting to buy that property. All right, 3rd on my list is floor plan and layout. And this is another one that is super hard to fix, but we see it a lot in older homes. If you look at new homes today, most of them are not multiple level. They're just one big flat level. If they're 2-story, it's basically 2 levels, right? But in the past, in the early 80s and 70s, we used to do all multiple levels, where you'd step down into a speaking space, or you'd step up into a kitchen. And those things are super passé now. Nobody wants those things. I keep seeing people online trying to push the speaking space, where it's a little cushioned area that's a little bit lower that you can sit down. And I see it online. I just don't see it in real life. So what I'm talking about is real life in this video. And so we want to make sure that we are working on that floor plan. Now, a lot of times, we might be able to remove a wall and fix the floor plan, or we might be able to fill in a space with a 12-inch gap where you don't have to step down in the living room, and that fixes that whole problem. Now, that can get expensive, so I'm not saying you must do it, but keep that in mind and price accordingly. All right, number 4, and a lot of these things, if you've noticed so far, are not things that you can do a lot about. Now, this one is especially something you can't do a lot about, but you want to make sure you make use of the space of the home. So this is a home size misalignment. And so a lot of people come out and they see a house that's, let's say, 1,300 square feet, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And what effectively that does is it makes all the bedrooms super tiny. So even though it might be 1,300 square feet, if that was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, or a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, it would be perfectly sized. People would feel much larger in the house. And then, so keep in mind, whatever the price of the size of the house is, needs to be appropriate for the size of the homes, bedrooms, and baths and whatnot, because you can have a relatively large house that feels small because the layout is just kind of cramped. There's walls in between everything, and it just makes a huge problem. I actually have this in my own home. We're getting it fixed right now, but it is a 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, and every single room, including the kitchen, was completely separated from each other, and it made the whole house feel a lot smaller. We're getting that one wall taken out, and it's going to make the whole house feel much, much larger. In fact, it is literally just a big empty room now, and it echoes because there's nothing in there except, empty space. So it's about layout. It's about square footage. You as a person can't do a lot about this other than making sure that when you're showing the property and prepping it, you want to make sure that it looks as bright and light as possible. So if you have window coverings, open them all up or remove them if they're older, and make sure that you have all the clutter taken care of and removed. A lot of the pictures on the wall, just take those down. All these things make the spaces feel a lot larger, and it's the best you can do to make people feel like they might be able to fit into a home when it might be a little bit of that margin value for them. All right, let's get into number 5. And this one is the big one. And this is condition and upgrades versus the price. And this is the one that I say all the time, where people have overbuilt for their neighborhood. So they feel like they need to have a $1 trillion kitchen inside of a $1 million neighborhood. And so what does that do? Well, that's just money out the window. Now, my biggest pet peeve with this is if you're planning on selling in the next 2 to 3 years, and you as the person who is going to install this kitchen or bathroom is not going to get the full value out of it, don't do it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't upgrade. You could always paint the cabinets as they are, or put new tile, or even just get the grout cleaned. All these things are going to upgrade things when you put it on the market without breaking the bank. And that's really what we want to do, is be wise about the expenses we make to make sure that our house feels as sellable as possible. All right, number 6 is stairs and multi-level quirks. Now, I talked about this a little bit already, but what we want to do is, if we have stairs, we're not going to, advertise that it's easy access everywhere. This is all about making sure the description of the property is exactly the way people expect it. What I don't want is like 900 people to come through the home, but not actually realize till they walk through the front door that this is nothing like what they actually wanted. So in the description, if there's some quirks, you can describe them in the best possible way to make sure that you're not creating a false sense of exactly what this house is like. And that is, if there's multiple floors or weird little quirks, a lot of times they'll have open stairs that people don't like. Sometimes that might be a good thing because it creates space if it's a 2-story. So we just want to make sure that we are accounting for this when we put it on the market. Now, let's talk about visual impact, which is number 7, and the view. So a lot of times people talk about, hey, this house has a view of, I don't know, the park or a mountainside view or the ocean or whatever. But if you're having to jump on the roof to be able to see what we're talking about, that's not really the view that people are looking for. Don't make up views that are inappropriate, right? If you're just in a regular neighborhood and you say mountain view because you happen to be a valley, that's not necessarily a mountain view. That just means that you're in a neighborhood that has mountains to the left and the right of it, maybe. Be honest about what those descriptions are so we can actually get to where there's a buyer that wants your property. Now, number 8 is comparison fatigue and checklists. So when I work with a buyer, I want them to give me a list, right? That, quote unquote, if I was able to check off all these boxes, that is a perfect house for them. Now, a lot of times when working with a buyer, they just go willy-nilly, and then all of a sudden it gets very cluttered. And a lot of times even you'll see buyer's agents that take people to 900 homes in one day, and the buyers literally can't, it just turns into one big blob of a house in their brain if they're not taking notes. I know, I've been there, done that. When my wife and I were moving to Moore Park, we came down 4 weekends in a row and saw 20 houses a weekend. And it was so hard, but we lived 5 hours away. We couldn't come multiple days in a row. My advice to buyers agents and buyers is to only look at 4 houses maybe 5 if there's an outlier that you know that you need to get into because you feel like it's going to sell faster than anything else. So only 4 homes a day. Don't look at a whole bunch and write down a checklist. Now, this is the gap that, once again, the seller is not in charge of this, but you can make a list on the buyer's behalf. And so what do I mean by this? Well, I mean that you literally say, here's the amenities, and you could have a bad side and a good side to this list. Leave it on the countertop and be honest about what it is, because we want to make sure that if we get an offer from these people and we try to make it as easy as possible for them to make an offer, then they know exactly what they're getting into. So like with a roof issue or any of those things, I like to have all of my inspections done and pricing on each one of those items that needs to be fixed. So people can't just come in and guess, because none of us, or a very small fraction of us, are actual professional general contractors or roofers or plumber guys that know exactly what the pricing is really going to be. So we want to take that off the buyer's hands so they know exactly what they're getting into when they put an offer on the property. Number 9, the numbers just don't work. Now, this is something that a seller cannot be in control of. However, it is something that you can put descriptions in, or even as a seller's agent, don't allow people to come in. I want to make sure that everybody who wants to see a property as a listing agent gets to see it. However, there are people that I know are just not going to fit into this. I like to talk to that buyer's agent and say, hey, what are their non-negotiables, and find out if my property actually has one of them, because then I can just save them the time and I don't have to waste my seller's day having 7 or 8 people come through when it's really only 2 of them, then the rest are just looky-loos. I'm not as huge a stickler on making sure everybody has an approval letter before they come in, because we're just not in that type of market anymore. But I do like to help the buyer's agents understand that this really is going to be a waste of their buyer and their time, so they just don't need to come through the property. This is just cleaning things out before we actually waste the seller's time. Number 10. Now, this one comes down to a lot of things. They're just not ready. Now, a lot of people come through property and they are, they're really looky-loos. They haven't gotten their pre-approval fixed. They don't have their complete down payment. When I represent a buyer, I try to get them not to go out there until they are 100% pre-approved. And why do I do that? Because I know once you see something, and this has happened to me personally, is we came down to Southern California. The first house we looked at, we really wanted to buy, but we really were just about a week ahead of our 100% ready to put an offer that instills confidence in the seller, so they would have accepted our offer. And so we were super bought into this house. We loved it. We were talking about all the different things we were going to do it, but we just weren't ready to present that offer in the right way. It doesn't mean we didn't have the wherewithal, but we could not prove it at that point. So it didn't really matter when we had the wherewithal or not. All right. If you've noticed, a lot of these things are not things that a seller can actually do a lot about, but we want to make sure that we understand where we're coming from. Now, one of the things that I do is I try to get buyers, when they come through, say, hey, what do you think this house is worth? And so when they sign in, I have them write down their number, and there's nothing like they just need to be honest. Hey, be honest on what you think this is going to sell for and what you would make an offer for. This is not in hard written stone or anything, but it helps me get an idea if there is a gap between what the buyers are willing to pay and what the sellers really want for it. And I try to mitigate that gap. I'm not looking for ammo to beat up the seller with. I'm looking for information to give the seller so they have a realistic idea of what the market is looking for. All right. So that's my list. Is there anything that I missed? Is there something that you think buyers would never tell a seller that is going to affect the seller more than anything else? Well, put that in the comments below, and be sure, if you're a seller and you're looking to make things as easy as possible for yourself, click down below on my seller's workbook, download it, no obligations, completely free. I want to make sure that you have as little stress while you're selling your property as possible. Links down below. And once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.